The bar was unusually quiet that night, the kind of silence that settles into your bones and makes you feel like something important is about to happen. I sat at the counter, nursing a whiskey, lost in thought. The amber liquid caught the dim light, shimmering like something that might offer answers if I stared long enough. That's when I noticed him. He was sitting 2 stools down, hunched over a glass of something dark. At first glance, he looked like any other regular, an old man with long white hair that draped over his shoulders and a beard that could have belonged to a philosopher or a fisherman. His clothes were plain, a worn-out flannel shirt and jeans, the kind you'd see on any guy trying to blend into the background. But there was something about him, something that felt ancient. I don't know what made me speak. Maybe it was the whiskey, or maybe it was the heavy atmosphere that seemed to cling to him. "You don't seem like the usual crowd," I said, attempting a half smile. He turned his head slowly, and his eyes, God, his eyes, were the kind of deep that made you feel like you were standing at the edge of the universe. "Neither do you," he said, his voice low but clear, with an accent I couldn't quite place. Something timeless. I wasn't sure how to respond to that. I shifted in my seat, feeling a strange pull to keep talking, even though my instincts told me to walk away. But I didn't. "Rough day?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though it felt absurd as soon as the words left my mouth. He let out a dry chuckle, a sound that carried more weight than I could have expected. "You could say that, but my rough day's been going on for a few millennia now." He glanced down at his drink, swirling the liquid slowly. I frowned, unsure if he was joking. "Millennia?" I asked, my curiosity suddenly piqued. "That's a hell of a long time." He nodded. "Longer than you can imagine, John." I froze. I hadn't told him my name. I hadn't even introduced myself. "How do you know your name?" He finished for me, setting his glass down and looking at me fully for the first time. His eyes were tired, not the kind of tired you feel after a long day, but the deep exhaustion that comes from carrying the weight of too many lifetimes. "I know everything about you. I know everything about everyone." My heart began to pound in my chest. "Who are you?" I whispered, the question almost involuntary. I didn't really want to know, but at the same time I had to. He tilted his head, as if considering how best to answer. "People have called me many things," he said, "but I think you'd understand if I said, I'm God." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, waiting for the laugh or the wink or the revelation that this was all some twisted joke. But none of that came. Instead, he just looked at me with those impossibly ancient eyes, and in that moment, I believed him. "You're God," I repeated, my voice sounding small in my ears. "Not what you expected, I imagine." He sighed and leaned back in his chair. "I don't usually show up like this, but tonight, well, let's just say I needed a drink." 1,000 questions ran through my mind, each one jostling for space, but only one managed to push its way out. "Why are you here? At a bar?" He gave me a sad smile. "I've been asking myself the same thing. You could say I'm disappointed, John, in humanity, in what you've all become." His gaze flickered to the bar's dark window, reflecting nothing but the empty street outside. "I tried, I really did. But somewhere along the line, things got out of hand." I swallowed, unsure of how to respond. "Out of hand?" "Look around you," he said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "The wars, the greed, the indifference. You've forgotten how to care for one another. You've forgotten what I wanted for you." He shook his head, his long white hair swaying gently with the motion. "I gave you free will, and all you've done with it is tear each other apart." I sat in stunned silence, unable to argue with him. What could I say? It wasn't like he was wrong. God stared into his drink, lost in his own thoughts. "I've watched you build civilizations, only to destroy them. Watched as you created weapons powerful enough to turn the world to ash and then used them." His voice trembled, just slightly, as if the memories pained him. "I sent signs, prophets, teachers, and still, you didn't listen. You've given up on us, haven't you?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer right away, and when he finally spoke, His voice was softer, like a whisper against the dark. I don't want to say I've given up, but I'm tired, John. I'm tired of watching humanity stumble down the same path over and over, always heading toward its own destruction. There was a long pause between us, the kind of silence that fills every corner of a room, heavy and suffocating. Finally, I found my voice again. So, what now? Is this it? Are we done? God looked at me, his eyes sad but resolute. I don't know, he admitted. I thought there was still hope. I still want to believe there's a way forward. But with every passing year, it becomes harder to see. And just like that, we sat there. Two souls at a bar, one mortal, one divine, both uncertain about the future of the world. The weight of his words hung in the air like the last breath before a storm, and for the first time in my life, I realized just how close we were to the edge. The bartender refilled my glass without a word, and I took a slow sip, letting the burn of the whiskey anchor me to something real, something solid. The man who claimed to be God stared off into the distance, as though he could see beyond the walls of the bar, beyond the town, beyond everything. A question clawed at my mind, one I couldn't ignore any longer. If you're God, why don't you fix it? Why not stop all of this from happening? He glanced at me, a weary smile tugging at his lips. You still don't get it, do you? It's not about me fixing things. I gave you the tools. You have to fix it yourselves. But we can't, I said, frustration creeping into my voice. We keep messing up. Maybe free will wasn't the gift you thought it was. God chuckled softly, but there was something unsettling about the sound. Free will was always a risk, but without it, you'd be nothing more than puppets. I didn't want that. I wanted you to choose kindness, choose love, choose peace. I hoped that given the freedom, you'd rise to something greater. Maybe your expectations were too high, I muttered. He didn't disagree. Maybe, but there's still a chance, John. There's always a chance. I frowned. What makes you think we'll change now? He tapped a finger on the bar, his eyes growing distant, his expression darkening. Because there are people like you, people who feel the weight of what's happening, people who want to make a difference even if they don't know how yet. Me? I almost laughed. I'm nobody. I can't change the world. No one person can, he agreed. But your choices matter more than you realize. Sometimes it only takes a single spark to ignite something larger. Something about the way he said it sent a chill down my spine. I stared at him, hoping to find some hint of a joke. But his eyes, they weren't just ancient. There was something wrong in them, something cold. Deep beneath the surface, there was a flicker of something darker. I downed the last of my whiskey, trying to shake the unease that was creeping in. So what now? I asked, trying to sound casual. Where do we go from here? God was quiet for a long time, staring into his drink as if the answer might be at the bottom of the glass. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. I'm just here to observe. Observe what? His gaze turned sharp, his eyes locking onto mine. The end. My heart skipped a beat. The end of what? Everything, he said, the word hanging in the air like a death sentence. The lights in the bar flickered, and the room seemed to grow colder. The low hum of the ceiling fan slowed until it stopped altogether. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing. God's expression was unreadable, but I could feel something shifting in the room, a growing sense of dread. It's happening, he whispered, almost to himself. What's happening? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. His eyes gleamed with a strange intensity. The decision has already been made, John. I've watched for eons, waited for humanity to change, but the same mistakes are made again and again. There is no more time. The scales have tipped. The air felt heavy, pressing down on me. I tried to move, to stand, but my body wouldn't obey. What are you saying? I choked out. God's face twisted into something between sorrow and amusement. I told you, I'm here to observe, to watch as it all crumbles. I gave you free will, and this is what you've done with it. The world around me began to blur, the bar dissolving into a swirling void. The light above us flickered once, twice, and then died completely, plunging everything into darkness. I could still see him, though, those eyes glowing faintly in the blackness. "Wait!" I shouted, panic surging through me. "What do you mean?" "What's going on?" His voice echoed from the shadows, distant and cold. "It's too late now. I'm sorry, John, but you'll see soon enough." Then everything went black. I woke with a violent jolt, gasping for air. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled my nose, and bright lights blazed overhead. I was in a hospital room, the steady beeping of a heart monitor the only sound in the oppressive silence. Confusion roared through me. What had happened? Was it a dream? A nightmare? I tried to sit up, but my body felt weak, like it hadn't moved for an eternity. My hand was clenched around something cold and solid. I slowly opened it to find a small golden necklace with a cross, gleaming in the harsh light. It wasn't mine. I'd never seen it before, but as I stared at it, I felt a sickening familiarity settle over me, like it had always been there, waiting. Before I could make sense of it, the door to my room swung open. A nurse rushed in, her eyes wide with shock. "Oh my God, you're awake!" she exclaimed, rushing to my side. "We didn't think you ever would." I stared at her, my throat dry. "How long?" "You've been in a coma for a year," she said softly. "It's a miracle you're alive." A year. My heart pounded as fragments of memory clawed their way to the surface. The bar, the man, no, God, the conversation about humanity. As the nurse checked my vitals, my eyes wandered to the television mounted on the wall. The news was playing on mute, but the images told the story. Riots, fires, war. The world seemed to be unraveling, spiraling into chaos. My breath hitched as I watched city after city fall into ruin. The nurse noticed my staring inside. "It's been like this for months," she said quietly. "People say it's the beginning of the end." A chill ran through me. I looked down at the cross in my hand, its weight heavy and cold. It's too late now. The memory of God's voice echoed in my mind and dread pooled in my stomach. What if it wasn't just a dream? What if the end of the world had already begun? And if it's true, God help us. God help us all.